Are you a podcaster? Maybe you've got that big idea and you're looking for a network to join. The multi-award-winning Ozcast network can get your content to eyes and ears all over the world. Join now for the first month free, and you could be featuring this sound at the beginning of your podcast.
Ozcast.
Simply head to ozcastnetwork.com for details.
Wavelength.
The real issue with data privacy is who's collecting your data behind the scenes, so in the back end of it, and who is that being shared with.
Sparking the combos about Adelaide.
It's every woman's choice. If they choose to have an abortion, then so be it.
You should be having...
These issues need to be properly investigated, and we need to make sure that LGBTIQ people are supported to be who they are.
On Fresh 92.7.
Welcome to Wavelength, sparking the convos about Adelaide you should be having. I'm your host, David, and tonight I am joined by Jamie for our very last show of the year.
I know. God, it's come up so quickly. I'm just not prepared for it.
It's like almost the end of 2020. What?
Wow, it's been a reflection. It's been a crazy year, but, you know, we're wrapping it up and we've got a really good show tonight.
We do.
I'm in the Christmas spirit. It feels like festive season at the moment. You know, there's lots of Christmas parties happening.
Yep.
People are out and about.
It's good fun. Thank God that we can do that though here in Australia, in Adelaide.
Absolutely. And today restrictions lifted as well, which is great.
So good.
I know.
What a great day. I'm loving this.
I'm loving this. Tonight, Adelaide, we need to have a talk. In recent weeks, there's been some reports of alleged verbal and physical attacks on staff at our bars. People just trying to do their jobs and maintain COVID restrictions. So this week, we're asking, just what have our bar owners seen during restrictions?
We'll also be letting you know everything you need to know about the coronavirus this week. But next, we're looking into whether psychedelic drugs could be used to treat mental illnesses.
Ooh.
You're listening to Fresh.
Wavelength.
Welcome back to Wavelength, sparking the convos about Adelaide you should be having. So, first of all, before we get into this next story, I just want to say that Fresh does not encourage the use of illegal drugs. In saying that, tonight, Hamish has put together a great story looking into some clinical trials going on at the moment into the use of psychedelics to treat mental illnesses.
To find out more, Hamish spoke with Tania de Jong, the Executive Director and Founder of Mind Medicine Australia.
Wavelength on Fresh 92.7.
Mental illness doesn't have to be a life sentence. Mental illness is something that might occur because we all get, sad and anxious, and we may even have brain chemistry that means that we have a greater incidence of mental illness, and we may have suffered severe trauma in our life. But mental illness does not have to be a life sentence if people get access to treatments that have the real potential to help them to get better.
While we now live in a golden age of medicine, there is one branch of our healthcare system that has started to show a number of shortcomings, that of our treatment for mental health. Over the last 50 years, antidepressants have shown to be largely ineffective at best or addictive and dangerous at worst. There's a gap here that's in desperate need of being filled. So what if I told you that gap could be filled through the use of a number of psychedelic drugs like psilocybin and MDMA? In steps Mind Medicine Australia, an organisation that's looking to begin a new paradigm in mental health care. I reached out to Tania de Jong, one of the charity's founders, about what it is they do and how they're trying to change the game. What is it exactly that Mind Medicine's trying to achieve? What are some of your goals and how successful have you been so far?
Everyone, this is Tania de Jong. I'm the founder and executive director of Mind Medicine Australia. My husband, Peter Hunt, and I set this up in February 2019 to ensure that new treatment options would be available for medical practitioners and their patients to treat a range of mental illnesses, including depression, post-traumatic stress disorder, anxiety, addictions, and a range of other conditions which are affecting so many people in our current mental health epidemic. We've had a lot of success since we began because there is so much desperation and urgency in the community for new mental health treatment. And so our solution is to ensure that psychedelic-assisted treatment, in particular MDMA-assisted therapy and psilocybin-assisted therapy, become available and accessible practitioners and their patients in Australia in medically controlled environments. And I just want to reiterate that point. We're not suggesting that people take these medicines home. Patients undergo treatment in a clinic. And it's important to say that these medicines, psychedelic medicines, have been experiencing a renaissance in the last 10 to 15 years. And there's been over 120 current and recent trials around the world which are showing remission rates of up to 80% after just 2 to 3 medicinal doses of these medicines in combination with psychotherapy. So these remission rates are unheard of. The other thing that's important to say is that there's been no adverse events in any of these trials around the world. So the medicines are considered extremely safe in therapeutic environments, and they're also non-addictive, contrary to what a lot of people believe. There's been a lot of stigma attached to these medicines over the decades, and now at last there's some very significant science which shows just how important these medicines will be to helping get people well.
So, in your opinion, do you think what you guys are doing is filling a little bit of a void in the current, way that we try and treat mental illness? Do you think that there have been some shortcomings with the current approach that we have at the moment?
Oh, for sure. I mean, in terms of the current approach, we've had a range of psychiatric medicines, including antidepressants and antipsychotics, pretty much for 5 decades, and there's been no innovation in treatment for 5 decades. And unfortunately, antidepressants, antipsychotics only work for a small percentage of patients. For example, there's a maximum 35% remission rate for a combination of antidepressants and psychotherapy for patients with depression. Now, if you compare that to 50 to 80% remission with psilocybin for depression, that's an enormous difference. That means the majority of the patients could get well and stay well with psilocybin, whereas in the case of antidepressants, some patients are getting well, but many of those do relapse once they stop taking the medicines. And there's also significant side effects of antidepressants and a number of psychiatric medications, as people would be familiar with. There's also significant difficulties in withdrawing from those medicines because they do become addictive to patients. So it's really, really important that people have the chance to have access to medicines that can potentially make them well. And we have a really interesting board, and one of our board members, Dr. Simon Longstaff, who's the head of the Ethics Centre, says that it's unethical for these medicines not to be made available to patients in Australia who are suffering in medically controlled environments. And, we owe it to the unbearable suffering in this country and to those people who've tried multiple different treatments to be able to access, treatments that are going to give them a chance to have a life.
Yeah.
And contribute to life and society and so on.
Yeah, exactly. And what you were saying before, it's just a bit, it's almost a bit ironic. It's a bit funny to me that we're currently treating people with drugs that, as you say, they often have to stay on because the moment they come off, it all falls apart again. And these drugs are actually quite addictive as well. So it's and when you talk about it, it doesn't need to be a life sentence. I think that's why a lot of people probably do feel like it is a life sentence because it's either stay on these drugs for the rest of your life, which come with a number of side effects and are quite addictive, or you kind of go on and off and kind of relapse and all of that, when, as you said, there's an option out there at the moment that kind of eradicates both of those issues. So,
well, and also the other thing about the current treatment is that quite often patients may experience an initial response, but then that often plateaus or drops out altogether over a period of time, and then the doctor will try doubling their dose or a different medication. It's a bit like a lottery. In fact, a lot of the psychiatrists we know who are on our advisory panel actually say, you know, if you bring 20 new patients into your practice, say today, in 2 years' time, only one of those will be healed and out of the system. Others will have dropped out, and others will be stuck in the system not getting well.
Wow.
And, you know, we have psychiatrists telling us that.
That's horrible.
So, you know, it's a pretty dire situation.
Yeah.
And we all need to be really honest about this and say, look, the current system is not working. Doesn't matter how much telehealth you put on, how many new patient access gateways you provide.
Yeah.
You know, if people can't get treatments that are going to get them well, then that's the elephant in the room, and we need to all be talking about it. And we need to be finding ways to make medicines that can get people well accessible as soon as possible.
Absolutely. So I guess on the flip side of that, what are, like I was reading through some of the testimonials on your website, and it was really amazing to hear about some of the, you know, really miraculous recoveries that people have made with this treatment, stuff that you wouldn't have ever thought possible, really. Could you tell us? Really. Yeah, could you tell us a little bit more about these stories? What have been some of the, you know, incredible recoveries you've seen from this therapy?
Oh, look, you know, we get letters and emails every single day from a range of different patients who have struggled, in some cases a decade or their whole life, with being treatment resistant to the existing treatments, and then have got access to these medicines either overseas or underground in Australia, because obviously, you know, the medicines haven't been legal in Australia as yet. So I'll talk about that to you further. So we get these heartbreaking letters from people either who've tried the medicines and got better and have tried literally every other type of treatment, from shock therapy to EMDR to cognitive behavioural therapy to multiple different antipsychotics or anti-depressants. And you just think to yourself, wow, you know. And then we get other people who haven't tried the medicines and are just desperate to try them and want access to them. So there's an enormous range of people. But just to give you a sense of, say, one of the recent trials, the phase 2 trials of MDMA in the US, supervised by the FDA with MAPS, were for 105 patients who on average had 18 years of PTSD. So you can just imagine how much suffering they experienced. And many of them were veterans and first responders. Yeah. And so they had 3 sessions with MDMA-assisted therapy, and then some therapy sessions on top of the MDMA sessions. And 52% of them went into remission immediately, and 68% of them had gone into remission by the end of 12 months. Wow. So that just goes to show how effective these medicines are. And the normal remission rate for PTSD with current existing treatments is 20%. So
yeah, it's a big gap there, isn't there?
It's a huge gap. And similarly, in the psilocybin phase 2B trials that are going on around the world, where, you know, there's also some really strong outcomes for people with treatment-resistant depression, you know, who are going into remission after 1 or 2 psilocybin experiences in combination with therapy. And I think it is really important to say that.
Yeah.
This is called psychedelic-assisted therapy. So it's not just the psychedelic, it is the therapy. And the therapy takes part in three sessions. Three steps. So there's the actual, you know, meeting your therapist, building rapport, you know, hearing about what's involved in the actual medicinal session. Then there's the medicinal session. Usually there's either 2 or 3 of those at the moment, depending on which medicine and what the patient's condition is. And then there's the integration process, and that's absolutely critical, because for many people, these treatments are like some of the most meaningful experiences of that person's life. Like, the experiences can be awe-inspiring, a sense of connection with self, others, the planet, a beautiful feeling of oneness, you know, unity consciousness that patients get, and that provides a window in which the healing can occur. And So it's really important that the insights that a patient gets in that altered state of reality is brought back into the real world and into patients' lives, work, families. And that has to be done through integration sessions with qualified therapists. So those 3 steps of the process are all very important. And you can't just take the medicine without any intention for healing and expect you're going to get better.
Yeah.
You might, but, that would be more the exception than the rule.
That's it. Yeah. So it's a bit of a 3-pronged attack. Yeah. So it's a really concentrated effort by the sounds of it. As you say, you don't just throw people in the deep end and then send them on their way. That sounds great. It sounds like a really effective way to do it. So I guess for the uninitiated out there, what is a psychedelic and what drugs fall under that?
Look, there's a number of medicines, and we like to call them medicines rather than drugs because, we're talking about these medicines being used in medically controlled environments. And the core medicines that we're working with at the moment are psilocybin for depression and potentially OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, and addictions, and MDMA, also unfortunately known as ecstasy, which is not, so MDMA is not ecstasy. It's important to say MDMA is pure GMP grade MDMA, whereas unfortunately ecstasy, which people think is MDMA, often has other stuff in it. So people go to a rave or a dance party or whatever and they get what they think is MDMA and it's got all these other substances adulterated with it. Then it's taken in combination with alcohol and dehydration. And that can lead to, enormous problems.
Well, ecstasy really is more so just the street term for basically any range of, as you said, anything really that just gets passed off. And as you said, people often think that they're getting MDMA, but, that's very rarely the case.
That's right. So the MDMA we're talking about, MDMA-assisted therapy, that is being used extensively to treat post-traumatic stress disorder and also now a range of addictions. But also there are other medicines that fall into this psychedelic medicine class. So that includes LSD, ayahuasca, ibogaine, ketamine, 5-MeO-DMT, DMT, and there's others. And fundamentally, these medicines, particularly psychedelic medicines, and MDMA is strictly not a psychedelic medicine. It creates a heightened state, a state of great loveliness and warmth and connection in which a patient can discuss, say, their trauma and feel very safe to discuss it, whereas normally when a patient's discussing trauma, they may be re-triggered, re-traumatised by talking about their trauma. But when they talk about their trauma, in the presence of MDMA in their system, it enables them to actually come to terms with their trauma and move forwards from it. Whereas there's no treatment at the moment that provides that sort of treatment for PTSD, for example. But I think it's really important to say that all of these medicines are being trialled in different trials around the world. As I said, over 120 current and recent trials. And more of the medicines are starting to be used in clinics, and, not only in trials, but also through the Special Access Scheme. So the Special Access Scheme is like a compassionate use scheme where a psychiatrist or other prescribing doctor can apply to the regulator on a case-by-case basis for patients who are treatment-resistant to other treatments for access to MDMA and psilocybin-assisted therapies at the moment in Australia. And we are seeing approvals coming through very quickly, actually, from the TGA in Australia. So at a federal level, we're seeing that. At a state level, some states have barriers, impediments in their laws that prevent the medicines actually getting into their states because they're Schedule 9 medicines. However, in some states, there are exemptions for use of these medicines in medically controlled environments for medical use. So at the moment, we're working our way through the maze of legislation in Australia, and the good news is that we've put in rescheduling applications for both MDMA and psilocybin to move them from Schedule 9, which is prohibited substance, to Schedule 8, which is a controlled medicine.
Yeah.
And that's a little like, medicinal cannabis. And ironically, some of the really strong psychedelics, like, for example, Ibogaine is in Schedule 4. And it's actually, much harder to control than treatments of, say, psilocybin or MDMA.
Which are Schedule 9, you said?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Yeah, it's crazy. So there's all sorts of, inconsistencies in the laws around Australia about these medicines, which is really unfortunate. But we're working our way, and, with our team and our board and advisory panel, we're working hard to try and get some consistent access to these medicines in Australia. And it's just, step by step, little by little.
Exactly. I guess in regards to that, roughly when do you hope or think that we will be able to see this kind of therapy readily and widely available?
Well, so the good news is that MDMA-assisted therapy is in final stages of Phase 3 trials in the US and is expected to be prescribable in, say, the next 12 to 18 months. And Australia is very likely to follow that, those regulations and those approvals. So MDMA is likely to be prescribable certainly within the next, 1 to 2 years. Psilocybin will probably follow soon after. But in the interim, we now have this special access scheme. So for people listening out there who are either, doctors or patients, or both, there is an opportunity now where you can actually provide access to your patients, or if you're a patient out there, then ask your doctor to learn more about this. And we can provide lots of information, and we're happy to share all that information so that people learn about these medicines. The most important thing is really that doctors, including specialists like psychiatrists, learn about these medicines, understand the trial data and the science behind these medicines so that they can start helping their patients to get better if these treatments are suitable to their patients. And by the way, we're not saying these treatments are suitable for every patient. Obviously, each patient needs to be screened, by their doctor, and they decide what's the best treatment to help that patient get better together. Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, I think one of the things I read on the website is that it's not a cure-all, but it's certainly showing a lot more promise than pretty much anything else we have on the market at the moment. So
that's for sure.
That's really exciting stuff. So some people who may be listening to this, who may be struggling with this, that it is something that they could possibly bring up with their doctors and explore.
Absolutely. And people, of course, can reach out to us, and we can connect them to medical practitioners who are also part of our community. But it's really important, I guess, that we get new doctors into the community as well. So speak to your doctors, and, the more that people who need this support speak to doctors and medical practitioners and politicians, by the way, speaking to MPs is also important because it helps with regulations. But, the more that any of you speak to your doctors about these treatments, the more likely it is that they'll go and research them, and they'll learn about how promising they are as treatments, and that will mean that these medicines can get to people more quickly, more affordably.
Yeah, fantastic, which is, so important. And
it is.
I guess I just wanted to ask you, why do psychedelics why have they gotten such a bad rap over the years? Why are they currently grouped alongside, hard narcotics like cocaine and heroin? It just seems a bit strange. Could you maybe bust some of the myths about that?
Yeah, so firstly, I mean, there's a a recent study that was done by the University of Melbourne last year, actually, that shows the relative drug harms of all, classes of drugs in recreational use. And by far the most dangerous drug to yourself and others is alcohol. And up the top there, of course, you have cigarettes and, methamphetamines and a whole lot of other things, ice and things like that. Right down the other end of the chart, like I think there's about 25 or so different drugs that were surveyed and researched. Right down the other end, right at the bottom, is psilocybin and MDMA because they're considered so safe, even in recreational environments. So, what has happened here is that basically in the 50s and 60s, these medicines were used to treat patients with PTSD, depression, anxiety, relationship problems, all sorts of things. Over 50,000 patients went through treatment with these medicines, and they were considered the next big thing in psychiatry. And you've got to bear in mind, these medicines have been with us really since the beginning of human civilization. Like you can see psilocybin mushrooms in some of the ancient archaeology of, Greece and Rome. They've been in ancient South American, Mexican cultures and even, ancient indigenous cultures in Australia have had acacia. So these medicines have been guiding us as healing tools and also tools for raising our consciousness since the beginning. But really they were rediscovered in, last century by Albert Hofmann in particular in the case of LSD and psilocybin and stuff like that in the 20th century. And then they became extensively trialled in labs and for treatment of patients. And then in 1970, Nixon had his war on drugs and basically wanted to attack, the hippies and the blacks, and he couldn't attack them for being hippies or blacks. So basically what he did was he basically went after all the leaders, of the different drug movements and people taking drugs and started, outlawing the use of all drugs except for alcohol and cigarettes fundamentally. And so since that time, and unfortunately a lot of other nations followed suit. Not all nations, as we know, there's a number of countries where these medicines are still legal. For example, the Netherlands and places in South America and so on. But a lot of countries did follow, including Australia. And so ever since 1970, that's 50 years ago, we've not had access to medicines that could have healed millions of people and saved countless lives, which is a tragedy. If you consider the spike in loneliness, social isolation, depression, the increased division in our society, the huge amount of uncertainty and anxiety that people are feeling, imagine if people had have had access to these medicines. And, that would, of course, been the case because the medicines would have continued to be researched and trialled and used and, investigated for a whole range of conditions. And now, actually, what is really exciting in this renaissance is that we're seeing that these medicines are being trialled not only for the, conditions that we've been talking about in this call, but they're actually being trialled now for dementia, for anorexia and other eating disorders, cluster headaches, a range of different conditions and a whole range of different addictions as well. So it's pretty exciting to see where the field is going. It's just a pity that we lost those 50 years.
Yeah, exactly. It's such a shame because who knows where we would be right now if all of that wasn't basically, put on the back burner like it was.
Well, that's right. I mean, Professor David Nutt, who's the head of neuropsychopharmacology at Imperial College and one of our ambassadors, says that what Nixon did is the worst example of censorship in the history of medicine and science.
Yeah.
It's a real travesty.
It really is. It really is,
Yeah.
because I've done a lot of I mean, this is why I took the story on, is because I've done a lot of reading into that, and, you know, the war on drugs and the history of drugs has always been something that's really interested me. And as you said, a lot of these drugs have been around, you know, since the dawn of man and really weren't an issue at all, had absolutely no stigma attached to them at all until, literally the last, 100 years.
Yeah, and it's completely unjustified.
Yeah.
Like, and Nixon knew, by the way, the really criminal thing is that Nixon actually knew how prospective these treatments were. He knew about the science. And there's actually a statement by one of his senior advisors that says, did we know we were lying about the drugs? Of course we did.
Wow.
God. Seriously, like when you think how much blood is on their hands.
Yeah, it's shocking. It really is.
Yeah.
Well, basically, Tanya, all I wanted to ask is, as we finish up here, are there any final comments that you'd like to make to any of our listeners today?
Look, I just really encourage listeners to jump on some of our events and webinars. So we have free webinars all the time with some of the leading people in the world. Like we had Rick Doblin from MAPS on last week. We're going to have Dr. Gable Matte, who's one of the leading trauma experts in the world, in the new year. We also have amazing screenings of incredible documentaries that help you learn about these medicines. We also have a great learn section on our website, which is mindmedicineaustralia.org. So you can learn much more about the medicines. I mean, I guess also, we're a charity. And so whilst my husband and I are philanthropists, we can't do this alone, and it's a huge mission to make these medicines available and affordable to all Australians. And we just love everyone to help support. You don't have to be a big donor, a couple of coffees a week. But, if you do have the capacity to be a bigger donor, we need you. And we have a wonderful circle of philanthropists, from small ones to large ones. Speak to your doctors and MPs. We've got a major global summit in Melbourne in November 2021 with some of the leading researchers and doctors from around the world coming to Melbourne. So that's a leading international summit on psychedelic therapies for treating mental illness. And then we also have chapters all around Australia and New Zealand. So we have 25 chapters in Australia and 4 in New Zealand. And we have one in Adelaide, and we'd love people to join if they want to help out and run events and build awareness of these medicines and just, help make sure that these medicines can heal the millions of people who are suffering, who need our help.
Wavelength, sparking the convos about Adelaide you should be having on Fresh 92.7.
That was Hamish chatting with Tania de Jong, the Executive Director and founder of Mind Medicine Australia, about how psychedelic drugs like MDMA could be used to treat mental illnesses. Pretty fascinating stuff there.
Really, really fascinating stuff. Such a breakthrough in terms of, science and psychology, and
of course.
incredible with mental illness and PTSD.
Mm-hmm.
What I was super interested to hear was that MDMA is going to become legally able to do trials in 1 to 2 years in Australia.
I know, it's come a long way, hasn't it?
Wow, that's, what a breakthrough.
Humble MDMA.
Yes. Look how it's grown.
I know. I mean, it's quite funny, she mentioned that you can't just do the drugs and expect to get better. You need to do it in conjunction with therapy. So I'm sorry, doing it on the dance floor, probably not the best
heal
thing. You forever.
Yeah.
I mean, it might make you feel good that night, but if you're going to have these breakthroughs, maybe chat about them with a professional as well.
Absolutely. Talk to your professionals, guys.
Of course, we do not condone the use of illegal drugs, but I mean, it seems like that these drugs are having quite an impact and clearly doing a lot more, or showing to be doing a lot more than traditional treatments for depression, like anti-depressants, SSRIs, those types of drugs as well.
Absolutely. It's a really, really incredible breakthrough, and just shows how much we don't know about mental illness and what can be used to cure and fix it, It's
Exactly. Now, if that story sparked some interest for you, head to the Learn section of the organisation's website, mindmedicine.org.au, to learn more. You can also donate to the organisation there, and there's even an Adelaide chapter of the group that you can join. They're always on the lookout for volunteers. Anyway, coming up after the break, we'll be cracking into our main story of the evening about what on earth is going on in Adelaide and how hospitality workers are being treated terribly over these COVID restrictions. You're listening to Wavelength on Fresh 92.7.
Wavelength.
Welcome back to Wavelength with David and Jamie this evening, sparking the conversations about Adelaide you should be having. Now, Jamie, you came up with this story idea the other week and it got me really fired up, especially knowing that you yourself working in hospitality. Tell me a bit about what the story is about before we crack into the main segment.
Yeah, so I'm really passionate about this story. I got the inspiration because I work in hospitality myself, and I got the inspiration after hearing about a couple of horror stories of fellow bar staff getting treated pretty awfully by patrons, like whilst at work. And it just really got me thinking about, you know, one, is the government still doing enough to support venues in Adelaide? And what can we be doing as patrons going out to really make sure we're working together with hospitality staff? You know, being able to go out and about is a huge privilege.
Yeah.
And I really wanted to delve into that and to really get a deeper understanding of what some of these hospitality legends have had to deal with, you know?
Absolutely. I mean, so true. Anyway, here's Jamie speaking with Ollie Margan, the owner of one of Adelaide's best bars, Maybe May.
Wavelength on Fresh 92.7.
So here we are, halfway into December, and I think we can all safely agree that 2020 has been one hell of a roller coaster ride. Hospitality has been one of the hardest industries hit. One of the hardest things to manage for venues has been the constant grey areas of restrictions. Punters have been getting offended and aggressive for being turned down with limited capacity, and in some cases, punters have assaulted staff simply for abiding by the laws put in place from our government. And if a venue can't even afford security for their door to protect their staff, is the government giving enough support? I chat with Ollie Margan.
Hi, I'm Ollie Margan, and I'm the managing partner of a few restaurants and bars in Adelaide, but most notably Maybe May on Peel Street, a small cocktail bar.
On reflection, how has this year been for you as a small venue owner?
I mean, it has been the most challenging year of my professional career, but I know I'm certainly not alone in that regard, and our industry isn't alone in that regard. But yeah, it's been quite a challenge.
How have you found patron behaviour regarding restrictions?
Variable. Coming out of the first lockdown, people were really good, and people were just really glad to be able to have the privilege to go back out. They were also really, really quite responsive to the directions from staff. You know, coming out of the second lockdown, the social response was a lot more severe. I think people were really annoyed that second lockdown happened, and that annoyance carried through into when they were allowed back out in the public. And we noticed a lot more friction this second time round.
When we go out, what should we as patrons be aware of? And what does respectful behaviour to you look like?
Look, I think it's actually really, really simple. Patience and understanding. Most of our job is literally coordinating people and managing dialogue with people to let them know, you know, health advice effectively. We've had to learn it in a really short period of time. If someone does maybe make a mistake or state a restriction that might have been applicable last weekend but isn't this weekend, they're not trying to be a dick. We're all just trying to do our best. And I think just as long as there's a little bit of empathy and understanding around that, and how hard it is for us as well, you know, we're all struggling to keep our own jobs, and our job is to try and create good times for the general public.
Do you feel supported by our government?
For the most part, the way that this has been handled has been quite well done. They've taken a little bit longer than they probably should have to meeting our needs and hearing our requests. Bars and restaurants have been some of the most compliant and most fluid and most dynamic industries that in response to these changing conditions and restrictions. We've been really good at it. And then the other thing, which is where they really have let us down, is the police support. There's police going around, they're saying they're trying to support venues by educating operators. But when you get two sets of police come through within 20 minutes of each other, when the first set had already acknowledged that you were being compliant, and they walk into an underground bar and put a flashlight on, that's really disruptive to already incredibly disrupted operating conditions. And if the next night you call the police because you can't afford to put security guards on because you've got an incident and you can't get a difficult customer out of your venue, and it takes them 45 minutes to come from a police station that is 50 metres away, it's the wrong way of going about things. They're not there to support us at the moment, but they're being really quite irritating in the way that they are educating us on compliancy. With these restrictions, you just can't afford to put a security guard to look after a capacity of 20 people. And without, the presence of a security guard, that can be quite a difficult and hostile situation. And I think some more support around that, be it government, subsidising a security presence in the precinct, or police being a little bit more prompt to our call to arms.
What does ideal government and police support look like for you?
As an employer, it's my responsibility to provide a safe workplace for my staff. I think it's the government and the police's responsibility to create a safe public environment for a venue.
Is there anything you'd like to say to the listeners out there?
Keep supporting. We're a long way from being out of the woods. It's really important that we see those smiling, polite faces, just reminding us to what life was like a year ago.
Wavelength, sparking the convos about Adelaide you should be having on Fresh 92.7.
That there was you, Jamie, speaking with Ollie Margan, the owner of Maybe May. A really great conversation there. Thank you for doing that interview.
No
What really
worries.
stood out to you, I guess, when you were chatting with him?
The biggest thing that stood out for me was his point on police support and, the not really doing enough if their job is to, create safety for the public and for venues to operate in these really, really tight restrictions and conditions. And then, a staff member has an altercation with a patron and they need police support. The fact that they're not coming down and they take, from where their bar is to Hindley Street, that's 50 metres. And if it takes, 45 minutes or longer to get there, that's not the government and the police doing their part,
Not at all.
So I just think it's a call to arms to get more support from the government, get more support from the police, and also to ensure that hospitality workers are safe in these environments just as much as the patrons are.
I know, absolutely. It's such a vulnerable time for people, and I think people are a bit fed up with the restrictions. And yeah, fair enough. No one wants these.
No, fair enough. And
no one wants these restrictions, but they're still in place, and we understand why. But you don't have to be rude and.
We've all got to work together. It's such a grey area for everyone. We're all a little bit in the dark right now, and it's going to take a little while to have them all ease up. But I think it's just we have to be kind to one each other, and empathy is important. And yeah, it's hard times, but we can do it.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that should be the message for the Christmas period, which I know is going to be crazy for bars.
Come at it with love, everybody.
Yes.
Peace and love.
Please. Anyway, later in the show, we're going to be speaking with some other hospitality workers in Adelaide who've borne the brunt of some really gross antics from Adelaideans. But next, Hamish will be letting you know what the hell has been going on with politics this week. You're listening to Fresh.
Wavelength.
Welcome back to Wavelength. We'll be getting back into our story about what Adelaide's hospitality workers have been going through during these latest COVID restrictions soon. But now let's throw to Hamish to let us know what the hell is going on with politics this week.
What the hell is going on in politics at the moment? Wavelength on Fresh 92.7.
Hello, and thank you for joining me once again as we take a trip through the often complicated and convoluted political plot lines of the week one last time. Thank God. First up, Australia's half-hearted efforts to confront climate change were once again highlighted, this time with Labor claiming that it will take 146 years to get to net zero emissions under the coalition's current projections. The comments came in the wake of Prime Minister Scott Morrison losing his speaking slot at a global climate summit for his inaction on the issue. And this only served to anger the public, with protesters clashing with police in Melbourne as they demanded the declaration of a climate emergency. While the left may be mobilising to fight for their raft of social causes, on the other side of the coin, counter-terrorism experts are celebrating a federal inquiry into the growing threat of right-wing extremism in Australia, with the pandemic especially seeing the rapid rise of radical groups throughout the year. This was made all the more apparent after an inquiry into the Christchurch massacre revealed that the shooter was active online with a number of far-right groups in Australia, but somehow escaped the attention of police. Also in the news, the inquiries continued with an investigation into the destruction of 46,000-year-old caves within the Juukan Gorge delivering scathing results. Western Australia has now been called to end any further destruction of heritage as a result of their mining efforts until new laws are passed. The mining giant responsible, Rio Tinto, has also had their actions labelled as inexcusable, and it's now recommended that they ensure a full reconstruction of the caves and negotiate compensation with the site's traditional owners. An exceptionally difficult task when the value of the site is seen as priceless by First Nation peoples. And that's what the hell's been happening in politics this week and for the rest of the year. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you again in 2021.
Wavelength, sparking the convos about Adelaide you should be having on Fresh 92.7.
Thanks for that, Hamish. We've got some more music for you right now, though, guys. We are listening to Fresh 92.7.
Wavelength.
Welcome back to Wavelength. Before the break, we heard from Ollie Margan, the owner of Maybe May, about what he's seen in these past few weeks working during these COVID restrictions.
Next, I spoke to hospitality workers Lia and India on the ground on their experiences with punter behaviour in Adelaide because of COVID restrictions out of their control.
Wavelength on Fresh 92.7.
My name's Lia and I'm a manager of a large venue within Adelaide.
What have you found to be the hardest thing about keeping on top of restrictions as a venue this year?
I guess it's the chop and change and not really having clear direction when restrictions are announced. So, it could be hours before we hear from our advisors as to what exactly it means. And there's a lot of miscommunication between, different venues and patrons and us.
What is the general behaviour of patrons like?
Generally, I'll have to say it's actually pretty good, but unfortunately there are a few bad experiences that seem to overshadow the understanding of the majority. I guess people expect us to know what's going on, expect us to know what's going to happen in the future, where we're just as clueless as everybody else in reality.
Have you found patrons to be respectful or disrespectful to your staff?
It's quite upsetting to see how some people have reacted, especially to the younger casual staff members. It's quite disheartening to see them getting, abused for something that they have absolutely no control over. They're just trying to get by, trying to earn a living, the inconveniences of people's dinner reservations, for example, seem to overshadow the inconveniences of the poor kids that, are getting stood down on multiple occasions or, are losing shifts due to capacity restrictions. We're finding out things as we go, so, it's hard to confirm or deny bookings when we're not sure what's going to happen, a week from now, I guess. So it's that calling people and having to tell them, that their booking can't go ahead or that they'll have to reduce their numbers. I've had people be screamed at and have the booking just storm out saying that they'll never return again because they couldn't sit exactly where they wanted to sit, and that was not to a management position, that was just to a casual staff member that was just doing their job, doing what they're told to do.
Have you ever felt, or have any of your staff ever felt unsafe in any of those situations?
Yeah, absolutely. I know quite a few staff members have had extreme anxiety to come to work because they know that it's just going to be another day of bad reactions or not knowing how people are going to react to not being allowed to come into the venue because we're at capacity, or they can't sit in the section that they want to sit in, or the menu's been reduced so that we can, afford to open our doors. You don't know what you're going to get. So I know that a lot of staff have suffered from anxiety to come to their own workplace, which is really sad.
If anything, your workplace should be a place of safety. And it's just...
Yeah, exactly.
Really
I know I when we were at that 100 capacity limit, I had the same thing. I had this huge dread to go to work because I knew it was just going to be a day of uncomfortable conversations and a day of disrespect and rudeness. I've never in my hospitality career felt anxious to go to work. Not very nice.
Have you had any rude behaviour from patrons to you directly?
Absolutely. People just come in, sit down and just expect to be served. There's no decency, can I get a table? And then people get angry if you can't have them in your venue. It's personally your responsibility to seat them, and it's personally your fault that they cannot be seated in your venue. People take it quite personally, and it's I'm not against you, we're just against getting a fine as a business. And, personally, it's not worth, your nice lunch or dinner isn't really worth everybody else in the situation getting remanded for it or getting fined for it. It's just not fair.
I think there's never been a more important time to understand that we, as a community, need to work together and treat everyone, especially hospo workers, with empathy and understanding. But we need to encompass moving forward together. On that note, have a banging New Year's, everyone, and I'll see you all next year. This is Jamie signing out.
Wavelength, sparking the convos about Adelaide you should be having on Fresh 92.7.
That was Jamie speaking with two hospitality workers, India and Lia, I guess about their experiences working in hospo these last few weeks. And really is, I guess, quite upsetting for me to hear. I mean, I'm someone that tries to treat people with respect when I'm in their workplace.
Absolutely.
And to hear that people are just so selfish in their behaviour towards these people, getting mad that they can't sit where they want, getting mad that they might have to change what they eat at the venue, getting mad that their booking's been cancelled because these restrictions just suddenly came in to protect all of us.
To protect all of us, I know.
And taking it out on people that just are working in these venues it makes me extremely angry. I just can't believe. I thought Adelaide was a place where we sort of were coming together and like genuinely supporting one another during this crisis, which we've been so lucky with because of these restrictions.
Absolutely. I think that's something we need to really take into consideration is that we are so privileged to be where we're at now, one of the safest cities in Australia and the world. Like genuinely one of the luckiest places we could ever be right now is Adelaide.
Yeah.
And it just, these poor hospitality workers coming to work, they're worried about keeping their jobs. Yeah, and then they come in and they have to worry about, being abused or treated terribly by patrons coming in. It's unacceptable,
Yeah, and to think that, I mean, just feeling anxious to go to work is not what anyone wants. You shouldn't have that experience anywhere. You should, like you said, it should be a place where you're comfortable.
Place of work is supposed to be a safe place.
I mean, I saw it this weekend. I was at the Exeter on Friday night and there was a line to get in because it was Friday night and it was the Exeter.
Yeah.
And there's restrictions. And people were just yelling at the security guards to let them in, yelling at them. Yeah. And it was just pathetic. It was about 7:30. What are you doing being that drunk at that time?
Go home.
Let alone yelling at security guards literally just trying to enforce the rules that nobody wants.
Yeah, and
nobody wants these rules. Nobody wants we understand them, but nobody wants them.
The venues especially don't want that. It's their job to show people a good time and keep people in their doors drinking for longer.
Yes.
So they don't want this just as much as you don't want this.
Oh, it's just insane.
But that being said, again, restrictions ease up today. There's a light at the end of the tunnel.
Yep.
Christmas is coming. New Year's is coming. It's, it's time, we can have big gatherings outside now. Yeah. So it's looking good.
Just try and have a little empathy, Adelaide, and try and understand that these workers, if they give you a bit of a hard time about, I don't know, using sanitizer or having you sit.
Signing in the QR code.
Yes. Just,
really important. Just don't give them crap about that.
The QR code thing is really important. And, I have seen people just be like, what? It's just something you should do.
Literally, because I work in a bar and the amount of times that I've been like, oh, hey, sorry, before you come in, can you please just sign on the QR code? And some of them have been like, what? No, not at all. I'm gonna leave the venue if I have to do this. And I was like, well, then it's legally you've got to leave. That's on you, my dude.
It takes 2 seons to open your phone and scan that thing.
Yeah, God, yeah, classic.
Enough with this weird paranoia about data collection. Anyway.
Cough, signal.
Anyway, next Wavelength explains everything you need to know about what's happened with the coronavirus this week. But right now, you're listening to Fresh.
Wavelength.
Welcome back to Wavelength, sparking the convos about Adelaide you should be having.
Right now, we're getting into our weekly segment where Wavelength explains what has happened with coronavirus this week.
Wavelength on Fresh 92.7.
There are now more than 72 million worldwide cases of COVID-19. As the cases overseas show no sign of slowing down, there has been a rollout of a vaccine called Pfizer. Developed by a German biotechnology company, the vaccine has been approved for emergency use in the US. Almost 3 million doses have been packed in dry ice in Kalamazoo, Michigan, to be distributed to the remaining states. Canada will also be receiving a batch of the vaccine, with 30,000 doses to be distributed to the elderly and healthcare workers. The first Western nation to roll out the vaccine was the UK, where 2 people suffered from an allergic reaction. As a result, it's been advised that people with a history of significant allergic reactions do not receive any doses. As for us back home, we're heading into the festive season with cautious optimism. There has been no indication that Australia will join the UK and the US in rolling out the Pfizer vaccination, instead opting to increase orders from AstraZeneca and Novavax. In terms of stats, Victoria has confirmed 1 new case from an international traveller who was in quarantine, bringing the number of active cases up to 7. Queensland has also recorded 1 new case, also from an international arrival in quarantine. In SA, it's been 2 weeks since a new case was diagnosed. As a result, the easing of restrictions will go ahead as planned today. Up to 50 people can gather in homes, and the limit on people at private functions has increased to 200. While now you can drink standing up, also expect to see QR check-ins at retail outlets and supermarkets.
Wavelength, sparking the convos about Adelaide you should be having on Fresh 92.7.
That there was a Miller letting you everything you need to know about the coronavirus this week.
You're listening to Fresh 92.7.
Wavelength.
Welcome back to Wavelength, sparking the convos about Adelaide you should be having.
Right now, we've got our weekly segment called Heaps Good News. This week, Andrew has got the goods for us.
I know there's gonna be
Heaps Good News on Wavelength.
I know 2020 is a year we'd all rather pretend never happened, but despite all the crappy stuff going on, there's little bits of good news here and there to put a smile on our faces. So let's dive in. First up, we've got yet another case of a complete stranger with a kind heart. A toy store in Gympie in Queensland is the second shop in a couple of weeks to have all its lay-by balances paid off by an anonymous customer. The store's owner, Lorraine Broadley, says the offer was overwhelming and will help many customers, some of whom were actually ready to cancel their orders. It comes after a woman paid off $16,000 worth of lay-bys at a Gold Coast store. All this sure to leave many kids smiling this Christmas. Well, heading overseas, and on a similar note, a New York painter has shelled out around $65,000 on work from struggling artists affected by the pandemic. He's bought over 150 artworks so far, and he's surely got some cash to splash, with his own stuff reportedly selling for $120,000 at pop. It's surely good news for the arts, which has been one of the hardest hit areas by coronavirus. Meanwhile, back here in SA, a tiny little pygmy possum has been found on Kangaroo Island. And why is this such a big deal, I hear you ask? Well, most of its habitat was destroyed in the devastating bushfires last summer. Researchers say the discovery is encouraging and hope they'll be able to find even more species that have been missing since the fires. And finally, call this good news or a useless bit of trivia, but what the hell, I'm throwing it in anyway. Mount Everest, yes, that's the tallest mountain in the world, is officially taller by a massive 0.86 metres. Nepal and China have jointly announced the mountain's height as 8,848.86 metres. An earthquake a couple of years ago is partly why they remeasured the mountain, with a team of 4 land surveyors spending 2 years training for the mission to measure it. Ha, useless trivia? I think not. Well, there you have it, the last batch of heaps good news for the year. Don't you feel your soul just lifting after that? Well, from all of us on the Wavelength team, keep your head held high and hopefully 2021 won't be a complete show.
Wavelength, sparking the convos about Adelaide you should be having on Fresh 92.7.
Thank you for that, Andrew. Anyway, that brings us to the end of the show tonight. Thank you guys for listening.
Thank you so much for listening. Make sure you're subscribed to the Wavelength podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or anywhere else you get your podcasts. You can listen back to our old episodes right now, and you'll be the first to know when tonight's episode goes up.
Anyway, that was our very last show for the year.
Oh my God.
I know, it's been an absolutely insane year, and we hope that Wavelength has been of use to you guys to explain what on earth has been happening in this crazy times. At the start of the year, I had absolutely no clue what was in store for us. We'll be back early 2021, and by then, hopefully we'll be right back to normal. But until then, stay safe, keep cool this summer, and have a great Christmas and New Year's. Thank you so much for joining me tonight, Jamie.
Oh, no, thank you. I love it as always.
It's been a great year, and thank you. It's been your first year with Wavelength.
It has.
What a year it's been.
Awesome. What a crazy year it's been, but I'm happy I ended up here.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for listening tonight, Adelaide. We'll be back next year.
Bye, guys.
Wavelength.
Are you a podcaster? Maybe you've got that big idea and you're looking for a network to join. The multi-award-winning Ozcast network can get your content to eyes and ears all over the world. Join now for the first month free, and you could be featuring this sound at the beginning of your podcast.
Ozcast.
Simply head to ozcastnetwork.com for details.